So Danielle also conducts bat and bat box assessments in the region and helps with local bat research. Tonight, she's going to talk about the importance of bats in their habitat and how we can create bat habitat, for example, through gardening, and how we can protect and preserve bat habitat. So this should be interesting. I'm one of those people who didn't really care much for bats until I heard a little bit more about them and realized how many of those darn mosquitoes they eat. And now I'm quite fond of bats, and they really are interesting little creatures. So I'll turn it over to Danielle. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. This is my second time back to present to Delta Naturalist Society. The first time was a few years ago when I got to meet Jim and his wonderful group, the Cascade Bird Box Builders, who have been making beautiful bat boxes and installed them around Vancouver, Coquitlam, Delta. So it's a great partnership. And it's not letting me move forward. Maybe I'll just, there we go. Okay, today I'm going to talk to you guys about bat habitat and why do we care about bats in general? What is bat habitat and bat boxes, and then just some other ways you can help support bats. So why do we care about bats in the first place? So bats are incredible animals. They're very interesting animals when you learn about them. They're very important animals. They are in trouble. I'll talk a little bit about their listings, and they need our help. And there's simple things that you can do to help bats. So around the world, there are over 1,400 different species of bats. They come in many different sizes and shapes. We've got little tiny ones with wingspans that are about 14 to 17 centimeters, which are the bumblebee bats in Thailand, and then large ones with wingspans that are 6 feet, which are found off the coast of Africa, India, Australia, and that area. The bats themselves are a very important wildlife, so we want to try to disassociate two words with bats, and that is pest and nest. So bats are not pests. They should be considered very important wildlife. And then they don't nest, so they roost. So all they do is they hang in crevices, small little spots that they can fit into. They can fit into areas that's as big as a dime. So underneath fascia board, siding, trim along your windows or balconies, that's where you're going to typically find bats. In very old buildings like the Bervilla Roost in Delta, which I have a book about on the table for the people that are here. That's a very old building. I've been in the attic and it's full of holes. Like you just see light everywhere. When bats can get into spaces like that, we have over 3,500 bats in that colony in July. But typically they're mostly on the outside. Okay? So what they're doing for us is they're helping our plants. Worldwide, we have pollinators and seed dispersers. So there are 300 different types of plants that are that bats eat the fruit and will spread the seeds, and then 500 different types of plants that are pollinated by bats. But most of the bat species in the world will be consuming insects, and they will eat tons of insects every summer, and so they're out helping agricultural crops. Okay. So many studies around the world have shown that bats will help save farmers trillions of dollars. And these costs come with, or these cost savings come with the fact that they're not losing crops. So they get to grow more crops and sell more crops. But they also have less operational costs as well, because when you have lots of bats in the area, then you don't have to use the pesticides. So it's better for the environment, better for the farmer costs, and you know, it brings in lots of bats when the farmers work with us. So it's great partnership as well. I don't know if everybody was able to hear that on Zoom, but that is the call of a silver-haired bat feeding in the valley. And that's the echolocation call of a bat. You can use bat detectors, which are available at the Fraser Valley Regional Libraries throughout all the way to Hope, from Delta to Hope. And that is a way to understand where bats are. So we'll use these bat detectors to see where they're foraging. The sound sped up, I'm not sure if people heard it, but that indicates a feeding buzz. So we know that this is an important area where bats are feeding. So this video shows the bat swooping in, collecting the insect in its tail and bringing it up to its mouth. And when the bats are feeding in the summertime, the female bats that are having the pups will eat their own body weight in insects every night. So one bat will be eating over 1,000 insects every night. And just to put that into numbers on the slide, you can see that in lab studies, they showed that 100 mosquito sized insects were eaten by bats every 15 minutes. Now that's an ideal lab setting, but it's still quite a huge number. But the other one, the big brown bat, is a study that was done on farms in the States, and 150 bats, which would fit in a standard bat box that I have at the back. They ate 1.3 million pest insects a year. So they're only looking at the insects that were affecting the corn crops. So that just shows you how important they are and how valuable they are to the farmers. So we did study, the South Coast Bat Conservation Society did field research in 2016 to 2018. And we had farms from Delta all the way to Abbotsford. And we're looking at the importance of bats for agriculture in BC, because most of the studies are done in Thailand and the States. And we found that the bats were eating over 129 different insects, and of those, 80 of them were identified as insect pests by the farmers. So not only are they very important for our plants and agriculture, they're also very interesting and cool animals. So they are the only mammal that is capable of flight. They will hibernate or have these dormant stages. They're typically fairly small animals. So the average bat that we have in Delta only weighs about 6 to 8 grams. Their wingspans, or about that. And they're very, very small animals, but they can live to be very old. So the oldest bat we have recorded in Canada is 39 years old in Alberta. And in the world, there's a bat that they found that was 42 years old through research. So they hang upside down, and they do that because that allows them to take flight. So I brought some specimens with me, and for the people that are in the room, you can look at how their feet are attached to their tail membrane, so they can't walk and perch like birds do. So when they're on the ground, they're mostly stranded. So they need to be able to hang upside down to let go to fly. And they're so lightweight that the blood doesn't rush to their head. Of course, they use echolocation, which is very interesting. And the study of echolocation has helped produce things like ultrasound and radar. So not only are they important for plants, but they're also important for technological advancements and very important for medicine as well. So these pills are blood clot pills that they got from the saliva of vampire bats, but they also help with surgeries and lots of other medical advancements as well. A lot of cancer development as well. So bats are very important animals just outside of plants. Okay. So in BC, we have 15 to 17 species of bats. So there are 15 confirmed species that we've heard and we've caught in hand. There's 2 other species that we've detected acoustically, so with those bat detectors, but we have never been able to catch them. So until we're able to catch them in hand and confirm that they're here, we have 15 to 17 species. So the 2 that we haven't caught is the canyon bat, which we've gotten lots of acoustic files in a Soyuz, like literally right across the border from Washington, about 10 feet from the border. And then the Brazilian free-tailed bats, we have lots of acoustic recordings of that from the coast all the way to Hope. And we're really hoping they catch one soon, because we're really sure that they're in this area. Okay. So here are our bat species. And then as I click the slide, you see colors coming onto the bats. So the blue squares are blue listed species, so species where their populations are, we're concerned about their population levels. The red are the threatened species, so more concerned with them. And then the orange ones are the federally endangered bat species. So we have two, the little brown bat, which is found here in Delta, and the northern myotis, which is not found in our Greater Vancouver region. So half of our species are bats, are listed species. And the populations are dropping quite drastically out east, and may be dropping in the future, near future in BC as well. So these three species here with the stars, that's in the wrong location. Sorry, that star should be on the eastern red bat, not on the pallid bat. Those ones have been put on the list recently on the COSWIC list to be put as endangered because their populations are declining due to wind turbines over the last 14 years. So they're currently being reviewed to be endangered. So bats face many threats. With any animal, we've got our natural threats. So our predators, for bats, barred owls are a huge predator of bats, especially here in Delta. We have lots of barred owls at some of our count sites. Their barred owl numbers seem to be increasing, and we're finding them a lot at our bat counts that we have in the summer. Winter is a huge problem for our bats because they eat insects. There's no food for them, and so it's hard for them to make it through winters, especially when the weather is cold and is longer period of winter. And then, as I mentioned, grounded bats. So this is mostly a big issue with juveniles in the summertime. When they crash or get disoriented, they fall to the ground and then they're unable to get back up. It does happen with migratory bats as well that are when they're weak, they don't have much fat on them, they can just exert themselves and fall to the ground. But there's lots of other threats. Cats are the main predator of bats throughout the world. So they're even worse than the natural predators. They can hear the echolocation calls and they just kind of hang out where bats are feeding, and they're really, really good at catching them. Even your lazy cat on your balcony, I get lots of calls, but my cat never catches anything. It doesn't do anything. It's just on the balcony and it's killing the bats. So just if you have a cat, please keep it inside, especially at sunset, because that's the most vulnerable when the bats are lower on the landscape looking for water. So the wind turbines I mentioned, pesticides, of course, is a problem because it's reducing the amount of food available for the bats, but as well as the chemical, the pesticide actually goes straight to the milk and will kill the young. It affects the adults as well, but it has a huge effect on the young. And we've got the urban sprawl and loss of habitat. And a big threat that we face is the fear, where people are seeing bats above their doorway and scared that it's going to attack their children or attack their pets, and they grab a broom, they grab a shovel, and they kill it. One of your members, I believe, Jack McDonald, he had a bat in his outside stairwell that hung out there all winter last year, and he educated the people in his building, and the bat was able to stay. And so as long as the bat is, out of reach of people, of mainly kids and pets, it's no concern. You can just let it sleep and stay.
What was the exclusion?
Oh, so this is someone who has bats in their attic, and they're getting rid of them. A lot of this work is done in the summertime when they're having their pups. It's not supposed to be done at that time because they are protected under the Wildlife Act, but people don't know that. Pest control companies, a lot of them don't know that. And so we do a lot of education for pest control companies and roofers and construction workers so that if they do find bats in the summertime, they won't exclude them. So when you exclude bats, you're supposed to deal with the problem, so how bats are getting into the location. You can't actually trap a bat and relocate it like you can other animals. I just wanted to briefly touch about white nose syndrome. My shirt is all about white nose syndrome. That Ministry of Transportation made this shirt to bring awareness of white nose syndrome. So it's a disease that is affecting bats in hibernation. So it's a fungus that gets onto the bats. It basically causes them to wake up and they have no food, they have no water, and they die of dehydration and starvation. So it spreads. It started where the X is on the map. You can see it right here, and for those on the computer, the X is right here in Albany, New York. So it started there. It was spreading about 2 kilometers every year for the first 10 years, and then it jumped over the mountains and came into Washington, and it's been spreading south into California. And so this fungus is what caused our 2 bats to be federally endangered. And so we found the fungus in the Kootenay region last year. It was confirmed at this time, actually in April is when we confirmed it, early April. And so we have not confirmed the disease, which is the fungus on the bats, but we did confirm that the fungus is in BC, and it's only a matter of time that we confirm the fungus, the disease. I actually have a call next week to learn about all the results of all the testing we did last year, see if we have any further locations. So 12 of the 47 species in North America are currently affected by white nose syndrome. We've got 3 endangered species in Canada and 2 in the United States. So I showed you 2 that are in BC. And there's 7 species that are carriers. So they will get the fungus on them and move to a cave and spread it to other animals, but they're not affected. And at the moment, there's no cure, but we're working on it, working on many different strategies. So the one thing that a lot of people have, maybe not your group, because you're a naturalist club, but a lot of people are afraid of bats because of all the misconceptions that are out there. So when I present to kids, the first thing they think about is vampires and that they're going to suck your blood. And there are lots of adults that also think that bats are going to attack you and suck your blood. So we do have vampire bats. They do exist. There's only 3 species in the world. So we have 1,400 different species around the world. Only 3 of them eat blood. And they're found in Central and South America. And they're feeding on mainly livestock, sheep and chickens, but also colonies of seals on islands. But they don't feed on humans. I mean, it could happen, but they're not going after humans. They're going after animals. Bats are not blind. They are really, really good flyers. They're not trying to get into your hair and nest in your hair. As I mentioned, they don't nest. They don't need any pieces of hair to build anything. But what they do is they fly really fast around your head. And that's what scares people, and they think that they're going to attack you is because of that fast movement around your head. And what they're actually doing is they're actually helping you. So your breath and your heat is attracting insects, and which is attracting the bats to come to you and feed on those insects around your head. And so if you do have bats around you, try not to panic. Sometimes, the movement can be a little scary, but if you just stay still, you'll notice that the insects will go away and then the bats will quickly leave afterwards. It is very rare that a bat will run into you. If you're very close to its roost and it's exiting, it doesn't use echolocation right away as it's flying, and so it could bump into you accidentally. But it is very rare. I do lots of presentations, lots of bat counts. I've had thousands of bats around me, and I think I've only had bats run into people twice in 10 years. So wear long sleeves if you're out at night and there's a rooster out. So as I mentioned, they are not a pest. They should not be associated with rodents in any way. They're very, very different to mice and rats and how they live in homes, and how the animals are. And so we really want to let people know that bats are their own separate group and they have no relationship to rodents at all. Okay? Especially the teeth, they have no need to chew, so they don't cause damage. Bats only have one baby a year, whereas rodents will have multiple litters and multiple babies per litter. Okay. So here is a juvenile bat being held by one of my colleagues in Alberta. So there are some diseases that you need to be aware of. Most people, because they associate bats with rodents, they think they're full of diseases. They only carry one disease in BC. It is a serious disease. It is rabies, but less than 1% of the bat population actually carries rabies. So it's very rare to come across a bat that is rabid. But as long as you don't touch a bat and have no direct skin contact with a bat, then you don't have to worry about it. There is no concerns. There are no diseases associated with its guano. In parts of the world, you can get diseases associated with its guano, especially in Eastern United States and parts of Canada, Eastern Canada. You can get histoplasmosis, which is found in bird guano and bat guano. And it's a lung disease. It's a fungus that grows in animal poop, which you would get if you're cleaning it up and the air gets up in, the dust gets up into your nose. But it isn't a serious disease unless you have lung issues. And so in BC, the only disease is rabies, less than 1%. Never ever touch a bat with your bare hands and you'll be fine. And then I just wanted to mention that bats did not cause COVID as far as we know. We have no idea who caused COVID, and it's just, people are blaming bats for it, but really there's a big difference in what we know and what we assume. So if you hear people spreading that rumor, tell them we don't know if that rumor is true, so please stop spreading it, because bats need all the help we can get. So let's go into bat habitat. So before we look at bat habitat, here's a quick bat life cycle so that you can understand where the bats are during the year. So right now, bats are starting to be active. I've gotten a few calls in Stanley Park and Maple Ridge. I'm pretty sure that we've had some bat activity in Delta as well, because Delta and Surrey are usually the first times that bats are active the most. Delta and Surrey usually is when I get my first bat reports every year. This year I haven't had any, but usually in February I'll start getting reports in Delta and Surrey. So they'll start to be active. They'll migrate to where they want to go into the summertime, and that's where they're going to have their young. And then in the fall, they're going to migrate again to where they're going to hibernate. And they have a huge long hibernation period. So that's could start in October and go until the end of March. So the main life cycles for the bats is our summertime, April to September, and then in the wintertime, they have different habitat for October to March, with those short little migration periods in between. So just like any animal, bats require food, water, and shelter. And this shelter takes many different forms. So for natural roost, our bats in British Columbia love trees. They'll use trees in the summertime and in the wintertime to hibernate. In the summertime, our bats can be using the trees as corridors for traveling, for food, as well as day roosts where they're going to spend the day and sleep. They could use it as a maternity roost. Some bats will form small little maternity roosts in clumps of leaves, as well as inside barks or cavities of other animals. So lots of different uses of trees. So those big giant clumps of trees, they really like to hang out in there. So, and in the winter time is when they'll use root rods. So when the tree falls down, they'll hibernate in there as well as in the bark or crevices. So we do have some reports of bats using rocks as well. Not as many in this area, but in the Okanagan, there's lots of roosts that are in old abandoned mines and caves. I'm sure we have lots up in Squamish and Lions Bay. It's we don't really know of any of those areas at the moment. They haven't been found. So, but being in a urbanized area, we have bat habitat pretty much anywhere. So little tiny urban parks in the city is where you're gonna find bats feeding. All those trims along houses, fascia board siding, we're gonna have bats roosting in there in the summertime and having their young. The farmland that we have in Delta is great for feeding as well as old barns for roosting. And then of course we've got our pools and our freshwater ponds. A lot of our ponds that are supplied by city water, a very important habitat for animals because they don't have much fresh water in the city. Okay. So this shows some examples of some of the locations where bats will roost in houses. So we've got our cedar siding behind window shutters, under soffits, roof tiles. So the top picture of the person is in the Brevilla Roost attic, and that's us collecting bats for our study. But we also have some bat roosts in bridges, patio umbrellas in the fall. There's a big one. Wood piles in the winter time. We often find bats in tree houses, chicken coops. And we even have juvenile bats will just cling to anything when they're out feeding and then they realize, oh, it's getting too late and they don't make it back to the roost. They'll even stick onto a chain link fence. And then of course we have our bat boxes and bread bark, which are artificial roosts that we create for bats. So the braided bark one, the only ones we have in this area are in Burnaby. In North Burnaby, you can see them. We have a couple more in BC, but Burnaby is the only location so far in the Greater Vancouver Area. The braided bark? Oh. No, but they have condo there. Yeah. So creating a garden for bats is a really good thing to do to help provide them with shelter, travel corridors, provide them with great food. So we have a document on our website, on the bcbats.ca website, called the Bat Friendly Communities Guidebook. And at the back there's an appendix and it explains a bunch of bat friendly plants that you could put into your garden. I do have a small handout as well. And I can send these documents for people that are on Zoom as well so that they can get a copy. So this just shows some of the native plants that you can put in your garden, like mock orange or trapper's tea or the white flowered rhododendron. But for those who love those big, beautiful rhododendrons as well, that's a non-native plant, but it's non-invasive. So it's a really good plant that you can put in your garden as well. It's really important food for moths, and so it will help bring bats into your garden. So we try to plant native species, but there are many non-native species that are non-invasive that are also very beneficial for bats. So when you're planting a garden, you want to use plants that are fragrant at night or that bloom at night. Things that are easily seen by bugs at night. So white flowers or yellow flowers are a good plant to have. And then you can put a variety of different plants that bloom early in the spring and then all the way to late fall. And that will allow bats to stay in your yard year round. So we do have bats that will migrate in the spring and the fall, and then will hang out all summer long. So what we also want to have is for a vertical structure. So this is a beautiful bat garden that these people don't know they have a bat garden. It's in Delta, right along River Road, and they had quite a few bats in a lot of their buildings. And we put out some bat boxes off the property. And so they have this giant pond right in the middle, all around the houses or all around this pond. And they have grasses and then small shrubs and then trees and these large openings for the fresh water. And so it's just a great area for the bats to go and feed and have shelter. And then of course there's farmland all around it. So they have other opportunities to roost and feed over the farms as well. So this is kind of what your hoping to get a community garden with vertical structures, lots of diversity of vegetation, and the freshwater ponds. So this is from one of the guidebooks. Someone said 1 plant per square foot. But really what we want is diversity. The more diversity we have, the better insect community we have. And so the more bats we'll have. Other things to think about when you're gardening, if you do want to garden for bats, or if you do have bat boxes that you put up to support bats, we want to think about lighting. So we don't want to have bright lights on, sensor lights that are really bright that are going to be in the area that we're trying to attract the bats. So if we can reduce the light exposure, so point the light down to one area that you're focusing on rather than broadcasting lights, or you can change your light bulbs to have different wavelengths. So this is red lights have been used in the Netherlands in this bat-friendly community to try to help the bats in this area. So there's what we want to do is try to keep the bats in the area. So if it's really lit and there's lots of lights, the bats will actually move around it and will take more energy commuting to their foraging ground. So, and then we also want to think of other disturbances. So if you're going to have creating bat habitat, we want to make sure those cats are kept indoors, especially sunset and sunrise when bats are lower on the landscape. We don't want to be using pesticides and trying to minimize the invasives. So this is burdock that was in Stanley Park, and unfortunately the bat got on there and ended up dying. It couldn't get off, and by the time someone got to it, it had died. Bats are very fragile. It doesn't take much. They can die overnight. And if you are gardening for bats, or if you're gardening for bees or birds, a lot of that is helping the bat community as well. So gardening for one animal often helps the other animals. And a lot of people ask me about bees, and particularly if you're gardening for bees, if the bats are going to come and eat your bees. But of course, bees are out during the day and our bats are out during the night. And so they're not around the same time. We do have wasps that will stay later into sunset, and so the bats are eating the wasps, not the bees. So here, these show pictures of different types of bat boxes. So bat boxes is a human-built container, basically, to support females in the summertime so that they have a safe place to have their young. So they come in many different styles and names. So we have our rocket box, which is a very long, tall, linear thing. We have our standard multi-chamber box, which I have at the back. We have our dual box, thanks to the Cascade Bird Box group. So I challenged them to create this box for me. And it has an attic so that it's 2 bat boxes back to back, and the bats can crawl from one to another. And this one, I believe, is a picture of the one out in Harbor Ladner Park. And then we have our mini condos and our large condos that can house thousands and thousands of bats. They can be made out of concrete and wood, most common wood. But yeah, different materials they can be made out of as well. So they are for summer habitat. That's the purpose of a bat box, is for the female bats to go in there and have their young. These are the typical species that we'd find used in bat boxes. So our little brown bat, our Yuma myotis, and our California myotis, as well as our big brown bats. We'll use it bat boxes as well occasionally. So what we want is we want to have at least 2 bat boxes in one location. So Nikki put up some bat boxes, and they've got it on their chimney and on their house, and they're facing different ways. And that's a great way to install your bat boxes. So you want to have them close together. You want to have them at different orientations to provide as much different microclimates for the bats. And then when you have your bat boxes, you need to monitor them every year, and you need to do maintenance, like taking out the wasp nest every spring, or repairing holes that flickers make, or other animals may damage the bat boxes. Typically, a bat box will last at least 10 years or more if it's well maintained. So when you're selecting a bat box, go to your Cascade Bird Box builder because they know what they're doing. If they want to build you a box, or you can design one yourself. Or it's really hard to find one at a local store or online because a lot of the ones that are sold online are not for our BC bats or even at our hardware store. So we want to have a very large box like the one at the back. So that's 32 inches tall, 17 inches wide. We want it to be large so that the bats have lots of room to move up and down, back and forth for different microclimates. You want to have multiple chambers. You want to have very thin chambers, so 3/4 of an inch. There's a loonie just showing you the gap space. They need to have good access all the way up. So lots of grooves on all surfaces on the inside so the bats can cling to it. So they only have tiny little nails. Okay. So these are some local bat boxes that you can buy at Canadian Tire, Lee Valley, lots of different garden shops. And they don't have the proper requirements for our bats in BC. So there are 1,400 different types of bats around the world, and our BC bats are very particular in what they want. And we don't want to use mesh or any material on the inside because that can cause damages to the bats or trap the bats. So we like it to just be wood on the inside. So not only do we have to have the correct design, but you want to have the correct installation. When you're installing, you want to think about predators. So you can put up a predator guard along the post. You can put guano catchers underneath. So the guano catchers are right here. The predator guard is a clear or metal material on the post. And so the guano catcher is basically collecting the bat poop so that you can see if bats are present in the bat box. And that way you're not shining lights up in the box because that's going to affect your bats. And then you're doing that maintenance and that monitoring every year. So we've got some damage from birds on this box, some wasp nests. And then this is a bat box that's never been maintained. It was up for a few years and it's full of cobwebs and leaves. And if those interior chambers are filled with debris, the bats are not going to use it. So that's why we need to maintain it every year. So the biggest thing you can do to help your local bats is to advocate for bats. Tell people about the bats in the area. Delta has so many bats in the area. Delta Surrey is full of bats. You're right along the ocean, the river, and lots of farmland. There's so much diversity with the parks and the urban and farmland that we have so many different bats in the area. And so we want people to be aware that there are bats in their backyard, and that if they do see a bat, it's not a rare occurrence. Bats are actually the most common wildlife that they would come across. It's just people don't realize how common they are because you have that very short window at sunset to actually see them in the sky. So if they're not roosted on your home, you think there's none around, but they are actually here. And we want to educate people so that if they do see a bat above their doorway, that they're not taking a broom and that they're not killing it or taking a broom and shooing it away. So especially right now in spring, as they come out of hibernation, they're very, very weak. They don't have much fat on them. So shooing a bat out of your doorway could actually cause it to fly away and drop to the ground and die. And then in the fall, when they're trying to build up that fat before going into hibernation, you're taking away that fat reserve, so they may not make it through that whole winter. Okay, so this Townsend's here on the soffit, it actually stayed there all winter. This is on the Sunshine Coast. Someone found a bat and we educated them and they allowed the bat to stay, and then it woke up and left. It's rare that a single bat would hibernate outside a door all winter, but it can happen. They typically like wood piles like this one. So yeah, minimize as many disturbances as you can, and please keep those cats inside. Or you can buy this bib, which this cat looks very happy to have on. So right now we're still in the window for white nose syndrome surveillance. So we try to collect as many dead bats as we can from November 1st until May 31st. And we will sample them for white nose syndrome. This is the way that we're keeping track of the disease. And we're also collecting bat guano in the spring to look for white nose syndrome as well. So if any of you guys know of anybody, especially in Delta and Surrey, near the border that has a colony of bats, and that they come back in April and they're roosting there, we want to know about that house because we want to collect that poop. So as the bats wake up and go to the house and establish them on their house, they're going to groom themselves and they're going to poop, and then from the guano we can actually look for spores for white nose syndrome. And so we're really trying to get places in Delta and Surrey, because that's the closest to Washington where we know white nose syndrome is. Okay. Any bat activity that you're seeing, you can report to our program. If you have any bat boxes or any summer maternity roosts, please let us know about it as well. We have lots of programs at the BC Community Bat Program that you can join to help us collect data on bats. So my contact is Vancouver at bcbats.ca if you need to reach out to me. And if you want to volunteer, I'm always in need of volunteers in Delta. I have a very large roost, two large roosts at the Alaskan Wildlife Management area just on the island there, West Ham Island, and I need like 20 volunteers a night. 4 times in the summer. You don't have to come all 4 times, but if you come at least once, it's greatly appreciated to get that count done. These are some of the other websites you can check out. So our website is bcbats.ca. There's Bat Conservation International, which was the first organization in North America. They have a wealth of knowledge about bats in North America, but also around the world. Wildlife Acoustics is the one who made the bat detector that is available at the Fraser Valley Regional Libraries. So if you want to learn more about the bat detectors and how they work, you can check them out. I suggest you going to your library just across the street, getting a bat detector. They're fun to have. If you like social media, follow Alberta Bats, because I'm not very good at social media and I'm in charge of the South Coast Bat Conservation Society. I only post maybe 6 times a year, but Alberta Bats are posting all the time. They have the same bats as us, and they have a wealth of knowledge. I don't have time for social media. I'm sorry. I have 2 kids. So here I want to leave you with this message that together we can help change people's perception of bats. So here we have a Western long-eared myotis that we first caught in hand, and this is how many people first view the bats is those sharp teeth and that kind of scary look. And that's a bat who's basically using echolocation and calling for help. Someone caught me, help me, they're asking for help rather than attacking me. And then after a few minutes, they're just chilled and they just sit in our hands as we get the data we need during our research, and then we release them. So yeah, they are very cute, innocent animals that need our help. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'll take any questions. And for those of you online, if I don't get to anybody, you can always just email me at vancouver.bc.ca.
Okay. Thank you so much, Danielle. Can you hear me? I'm not sure if you're hearing me or not.
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I just want to say thank you to Danielle. That was very interesting. You're obviously very passionate about your little critters. And I think that you probably made a lot of people more likely to want to help those bats. So thanks again. I don't see any questions on chat. There was just one comment made earlier by Audrey. And it's about questions that are being asked in the room. And people on Zoom are not hearing the questions, and unless somebody repeats the question as well as the answer, we're not getting the whole picture.
Okay, I can repeat questions.
We have one question. Well, we have a couple of questions here in the room. Debbie had her hand up first. Debbie, and we'll repeat your question so the people on Zoom can hear it.
Two quick questions. I see bats in my yard. There's a little pond. How far do they travel from where they roost to where they, like, their feeding areas? Is that known?
Yeah, so the first question was she has a pond in her yard and she was wondering how far bats are traveling to go feed from the roost. And it's very dependent on location and species. And so some species will roost and feed within 150 kilometers, 150 meters. And other bats will travel like 100 kilometers. They will do in a whole night. They'll do a circle, so they're not going 100 kilometers, but they'll go like 10 or 15 kilometers and then keep going and then do like a circle of like 100 kilometers. It's typical that most of the bats in BC are traveling anywhere from 2 to 10 kilometers out from their roost to feed.
Did you have a second question, Debbie?
Yeah, in your angel rodent.
Yes.
Yes, rodents are actually babbles, because I went to another bat talk and they said, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And I was thinking that the females produce milk, like humans, like people don't think of bats feeding their young milk.
Yes.
And so do rodents and so do humans. So we're all related. There is some correlation between the rodent and the bats.
Yeah.
It's more of a statement than a question, but yeah.
Yeah. So her second comment was that there is some correlation between rodents and bats. And there is, because they're mammals and we're mammals and bats are mammals. But if you look at the phylogenetic trees of animals and evolution, bats are actually closer related to humans and rodents through the phylogenetic trees. Their most closely related relative is a marsupial in Madagascar, some type of marsupial animal. But yeah, they're very, very different. But you know, we are all mammals. So yes, there is some similarities in that they do feed their young milk.
We have questions. We got all sorts of questions.
I had a question.
Maybe we'll take a question on Zoom. I think it's Paul.
It's from Audrey.
Yes.
Audrey wants to know, how do the bats drink water from ponds?
So they drink water on the fly. So they fly down, they have their tongue out and they lap it up and then they fly away.
All right. I have a question. Is there any, I know one of the negatives about bats and people is the fear of rabies. Now, is there any danger of vampire bats and rabies in BC, like infecting other animals? I know they don't attack humans, but.
Yeah, so the vampire bats are not in BC, so they're in Central America or South America. I do not know if vampire bats carry rabies, so some bat species do not carry rabies. The bats that are in BC can carry rabies.
Interesting. That.
Sorry. So bats in BC may carry rabies, so 1%, less than 1% of the population can. And sorry, I'm distracted here. And they can pass that rabies on to another animal or to humans. So the rabies variant in British Columbia is only from bats. So if anybody in BC or any animal or any person is going to get rabies in BC, it's going to be from bats unless they traveled and brought it back with them. In other parts of Canada, like in Ontario, you can get rabies from different types of animals. But in BC, it's only from bats.
Hmm.
Well, maybe we'll come back to the room here. There were a bunch of hands. Annie, I think you had a question?
It was answered. I was wondering how they drank.
Okay, at the back.
Yes, I was wondering how last year's Western data looks.
Last year's what?
Western Island data from Alaxon.
Oh,
A good year, a 4 year.
it was a good year. Yeah, the number.
Perhaps
Yes.
repeat the question?
Yes, sorry. So they're wondering about the count data from West Ham Island last year. The bat numbers were up a little bit from the year before, and they seem to be stable. So we've been monitoring that roost for 6 or 7 years now, and the numbers seem to increase slightly or stable. So we're very happy with that. So we'll see how it goes this year.
Dees Island? Dees Island?
And for Dees Island, the same. Yeah. Yeah, we haven't had any declines that we're aware of in Delta yet. So if people are interested, Alaskan has 800 bats, 800 to 1,200 bats in their barn at one of the barns, and Dees Island has 3,500 bats.
Holy cow.
Yes.
How far north are the bats in British Columbia? Do they winter like farther north or not?
Yes, so the question was how far north are bats in British Columbia? So we have bats throughout the whole province. There's bats up in Alaska. So we'll find bats all summer long, like all the way up North America. But for winter and hibernation, we do know of a roost where bats are hibernating. And it's around Dawson Creek, Moberly area. I can't remember exactly where it is, but I know it's like up by like in between Fort St. John and I can't think of the community. I should know it because I Chetwynd. No, it's not Chetwynd, but
Fort Nelson?
I'd have to look at a map. But it's north of Prince George. I used to work there, so I should know the name of the community, but I can't think of it. But it is north of Prince George, towards north of Mackenzie, towards Fort St. John. There is a hibernation, hibernacula up there. And that's the furthest north one that I know about. But I believe there are some in Alaska as well.
Nancy?
Are they making, for the white nose syndrome, are they making any progress towards a cure? Are they looking towards a cure?
So for white nose syndrome,
devastating.
yeah, so for white nose syndrome, there has been research since 2007, 2008. They have been trying many different types of cures to help with white nose syndrome. They've even like invented spider robots that will go into places and groom the white nose syndrome off of bats. The problem is that there's nothing so far that we can broadcast across North America. So there's all these like local efforts that are being done in many different states and provinces to help local populations. And what we're trying to do is create something that we can like kind of help all the bats at once. Lots of different things have been tried, but it's very delicate because of the ecosystem and the caves. We don't want to be affecting any other animals. What we do know is that white nose syndrome doesn't affect other animals and doesn't affect humans. It's only bats, and that's because it's waking them up. And so it's very tricky, but yes, there's tons of research out there, tons of little things that have been done, where I'm part of a team that's doing research to help bats through bat boxes. So helping bats in the summertime or basically the fall before they hibernate to protect them going into hibernation is what our study is working on. But lots of different things out there, just nothing yet that can be used everywhere.
I have a couple more questions online here.
So the second question was, where did white nose syndrome originate from? So it was found in Albany, New York, and that strain of the fungus was found from Europe. We don't know exactly where in Europe it came from, and we don't know exactly how it was brought over, but there's a theory that it was brought over with cheese. So Europeans like to bring cheese to New York and age the cheese in caves and then bring it back to Europe and sell it for a high amount of money. And so it was thought that the fungus came with these people and their cheese, but we don't know. It's a fun theory, but we don't know exactly.
Elizabeth, there's a couple more online questions.
Yes, we do have a couple more, yes. Janet Caravan wants to know if you have bat-friendly community training.
Bat-friendly community training. Yeah, so bat-friendly community is a designation that we give to municipalities. So Delta is a bat-friendly community, Richmond's bat-friendly community, and Fort Moody in the Greater Vancouver region. We also have Peachland and Dawson Creek, and Comox area. So we have a handful of bat-friendly communities in the province, and I'm happy to work with any municipality to move that forward. If anybody knows anybody in government that wants to bring that certification to their municipality. So we are working on a program so that schools and community centers or other groups can become bat-friendly as well.
I think that
So
maybe.
stay tuned.
And Audrey wants to know, how do you count bats?
So very simple. To count bats, all we do is stand outside a roost. We have clickers, and we just click. In June, so we do 2 counts in June, and that counts the female bats that are in the roost. June counts are pretty simple most of the time. Females tend to just leave the roost and go off and feed. July, August, it can be very tricky because the young are flying around the roost learning to fly. So we have to just make sure that we're not counting anything that is flying above us or flying around a roost, and then we're only counting things flying out of the roost. And anything that goes in, we don't count the next one coming out. So when you got 1,800, 3,500 bats, it can start to be a little tricky in July. But if anybody's interested in learning how to count bats, they can come out and watch us or volunteer.
I've seen documentaries and watched all these things screaming out of caves and stuff, and I've wondered too how you would ever manage to count. I mean, there's just so many, but then people count birds, and it's the same kind of thing happening with the birds too.
Yeah, when you do it often enough, you don't get distracted by the other bats flying. But it's actually quite fun to be distracted. I have a great roost out in New West that is one of the best ones because the bats actually stay in the area for like 5 or 10 minutes and then feed and swarm, and it's a lot of fun to count those ones. Unfortunately, I have lots of volunteers in New West. I only have one roost, so I can't offer that place to you guys.
I think there might have been some more questions here. Annie?
Do you ban the bats, like
Yes.
banning birds?
Yeah, so the question was, do we ban bats like you ban birds? Yes, we ban bats. We ban males, so that we know that we caught the bat and then we know that we have a recapture. It's just one ban that we put, and it's the metal ban that you'd have on birds as well. So birds can get the colored bands as well. But the metal band that has the number on it, that's what we use on the bat. It looks very similar to a bird band. We use the same pliers as a bird band, and we put it on their forearm. It's occasionally we'll do juveniles, but usually we do the males just so that we know we recaptured it.
So in birds, quite often it's done with drift nets. What do you use for bats?
How do we capture the bats? So when we're capturing bats, we use very similar mist nets like you'd use for birds. They actually call them bat mist nets. They're supposed to be a little bit finer. They look very, very similar. I've used both. Or we use what's called a harp trap, which is basically 2 layers of very thin fishing line that are spaced a couple of inches apart and staggered. And so the bat flies through the first layer of fishing line and kind of gets confused and hits the second layer of fishing line and falls down into a plastic bag, and then it can't crawl out. And then, yeah, so that we'll use, like, if we know the bats are coming out of this window or this spot in particular, and we can hang the bag, we'll use the harp trap. And we can get 100 bats in like 20 minutes, which is amazing. But otherwise we have to use the mist nets if they're coming out of a building, and we may get 100 bats in 10 hours. We're lucky. Birds are a lot easier to capture. They don't use echolocation.
Fascinating. Any other questions? Yes, Nikki.
How does the bat thing work?
So I've never seen,
What's the question?
so how does a cat bib work? So I've never seen a cat with the cat bib. I've only known one person who's actually bought the cat bib and they said it does work. So it's a long bib that goes around the neck, and it kind of like prevents the cat from pouncing. And so because it loses that pouncing ability, it's really good at deterring it from birds and bats. So it was made for birds. And I was told by the person it has that it does work, but their cat doesn't like it.
Too bad. Well, we might be exhausting the questions. I think you've received more questions than any of our recent presenters. It's obviously a testimony to how interesting the
Well,
subject
thank
is.
you for your interest. Oh, we got one more.
Just wondering, with the Zoom Lab would probably be interested in your display if there was some way
Oh.
that you could take it and show it to them, because it is very interesting.
Yeah, I don't know, is the camera portable? I can actually, I'll bring the specimens over. Why don't I bring that over?
Everybody can be thinking about additional questions you may have while Danielle is bringing over some of her exhibits.
So for those of you who couldn't make it, I brought some fun things with me. Oh, I'm using this camera. So this is a bat skeleton that I brought with me. And you can see those very long, thin bones. Those are the finger bones that make up the wing. And then up here is a tiny little thumbnail. So that's what they have to crawl with, that tiny little thumbnail. Then this is 2 baby little brown bats. So for scale, you can see my finger. This is a juvenile little brown bat. So this one is about a month old. And you can see its thumbnail sticking out.
Yeah.
And then there we go. That would be an adult. Let's see, this way. There we go. That's an adult little brown bat over here. And then we've got a big brown bat, a silver-haired bat, a western long-eared bat. This is a hoary bat. And then a Townsend's big-eared bat.
Great.
And I can, Elizabeth, I'll send you some documents that I have on the table for people to grab. And then if you want to share those with the other members, they can see the documents. There's a couple of brochures and some handouts.
Okay, great.
And I have bookmarks as well at the back, but I can't send you bookmarks, I'm sorry. But someone can pick up some bookmarks and you can distribute them at another meeting if people are interested.
Yeah, great.
Paul, do you have another question, Paul?
Well, it's more of a comment. It's interesting how small the bats are, because if you ever go to Australia, you'll see the fruit bats and they're huge.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
hang from trees and they're giant, enormous. 100
Yeah, so
times
our largest bat in Canada is about 30 grams and 40 centimeters wingspan.
Yeah.
Whereas the largest bat in the world weighs about 3 pounds and a 6-foot wingspan.
No.
Wow.
So it's still very light if you think about 6-foot wingspan, only
Wow.
3 pounds. So very, very small bones. And they're all wing. Their size is all wing.
Well, I think we'll wrap up this wonderful bat presentation. Elizabeth, any final comments?
No, that was great. Thank you so much, Danielle. That was really interesting. I think everybody enjoyed it. And I see people clapping here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Danielle, here's I think this is the original artwork of the of our promotional poster.
Oh.
And your honorarium is being mailed to you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Debbie, do you have any comments on the plant quiz